for one last trip to this book. I mean, you could always go back and read it for yourself. That wouldn't be a bad thing. But as far as in our series, looking at the book of Nehemiah and the rebuilding of Jerusalem, the rebuilding of the walls and the gates and all that took place, and we've been dealing with the revival that happened afterwards. And then, of course, we're in chapter 13, and chapter 13 is the sad state that the children of Israel had reached after 1 year of Nehemiah being absent, and he had gone back to do more of the work he was supposed to do before the king. And if you remember, when the king sent him, the king was very interested in trying to find out, how long are you going to need to be gone? Because I value you here. You know, I want you in your job and your position. And so Nehemiah had to return for about a year's time frame. And he comes back now to Jerusalem after being gone for a year, just to find that the children of Israel have walked away from the covenant they made with God and are doing things that, keep in mind, because this will be important in just a moment, but in 430 BC, so just 2 years after Nehemiah's return, you have Malachi. And that's where we get the book of Malachi, and what he writes as a final admonition and warning from God to the children of Israel because of their continual forsaking of their covenant, the continual forsaking of the Lord. Even though he's blessed them, they saw revival, they got back on track. That same generation within a year lost focus and went off track. Then Nehemiah comes back and forces them back on track, and within 2 years, they're falling back off again, and Malachi is given the final warning that is going to be given to them just before we basically have a time of silence, and then comes the New Testament and the birth of Christ. I say that because we're going to look at Malachi here in just a moment concerning one of, matter of fact, the very next issue that is found in Nehemiah 13. But through this, we saw that there are violations that Nehemiah runs across, and he sees why the revival has ended. The revival ended because their hearts had changed. And through their hearts' change, they have now a mindset shift away from where they were going to now back to where they came from. And they're heading right back to the rebellion, heading right back to the leaving of the following of the Lord's commands. So the first violation was found in the area of separation, we said, and they refused to separate themselves any longer from those in which they had no business being joined with. And that separation, they were marrying and giving in marriage. They were bringing people within their midst that did not worship the Lord, and they weren't teaching them to worship the Lord. They were adopting and bringing back in the practices of the heathen world. They were letting go of their convictions because they were being overwhelmed with the influence of those around them to follow other ways, to follow societal norms and not be so weird. All right? And so that was the first thing, the violation of separation. Then we saw lastly, the last time we saw the violation of the temple, where the Eliashib had made an alliance with Tobiah the Ammonite, one of the individuals who had spoken against and been such a hindrance to the work. Here is Eliashib, one of the main priests and all, and he has the ability to handle some things with the temple, and he gives away an area that's dedicated to the things of God, and he gives that area of the temple to Tobiah to store his stuff. So they begin to now violate the temple, lost respect for the house of God, lost respect for who they were as the people of God, lost respect for the house of God. And then we go into the third violation, which is where we start tonight. We got to the third and the fourth violations. The third violation is found in chapter 13, verse number 10 through verse number 14, and it is the violation of the tithe. In Nehemiah chapter 10, verse 32 through verse number 39, we had already learned that the covenant the people made included a promise to be faithful to the tithes and offerings needed. That number one, they were to be obedient in giving because they belonged to the Lord. But then beyond that, each thing had a purpose for the work of the Lord and for those who had given their lives to serve the Lord. I remind you, the Levites weren't given an inheritance. The Levites weren't given like all the rest of the people. They were to be dependent upon the things given unto the Lord. The priests were given according to that which the tithe was and things of that nature. So the workings of the ministry, the workings of the temple, the ability to do the job that needs to be done, all of that was supplied by the giving of God's people. By the way, the principle still applies today. There is no getting the gospel around the world if God's people aren't willing to give in order to help send it. Sometimes we're the ones to go. But even if you're going, you're still also required in God's eyes to be a giver. How can you go and try to raise support to be given to if you're not willing to give yourself? Or worried about the things they can gain from themselves. Well, I got to take care of this. Well, I got to buy this piece of land. Well, I've got to make sure that we repaint the house, or we redo this, or we do that. They were worried about their physical things they had planned, and they were no longer concerned about the work of the Lord. By the way, the revival that happened led them to having a vision for the work. Now they'd lost their vision. And so we find it in verse number 10 to verse number 14, it says, "And I perceive that the portions of the Levites had not been given them. For the Levites and the singers that did the work were fled every one to his field." So here you go. The ones who were doing the work, and they were able to do the work because God's people were being obedient, and it was providing for their needs so that they could focus on the work of the Lord. Now, their needs are not being provided for. Their families are going hungry. Everything that they're dependent upon has now been ripped out from underneath them because of people who no longer are faithful to their commitment to God. So what it requires is the work of the Lord comes to a screeching halt while these individuals had to flee out into the fields to go work in other areas to help provide for their families, and there's no longer time to do the work of the Lord that they're called to do. And so the temple suffers. As the temple or the house of God suffers, and the work of that, by the way, then all of a sudden, and here's how it goes. It's not the real circular scenario that happens. The people stop giving. So those who are dependent upon the tithes coming in to provide the needs so they can focus on the work of the temple, well, now they don't have what they need, and they've got to leave the work in order to provide in other ways. That was not what God intended for them, but now they're having to forsake this work to go there. Now the people who stopped giving in the first place look at the temple and say, "Oh, ain't nothing happened there anymore. Why are we even going to go? Well, ain't nobody there anymore. I go by and there ain't no priest out to make sacrifices anymore. I don't know where everybody went." Well, if the people responsible for taking care of this place would show up once in a while, we might actually decide to come to church. Well, the problem was they had stopped giving, and the ones who were there to do the work had to find some way of their own to provide for their families because now there was no provision. So they're out trying to provide for their families, but they can't be here and there at the same time. And so now the people turn around and say, well, I just, doesn't look like anything's happening there anymore, so we just decided we stopped going. Well, where did it start? It started with unfaithful people. And so the people created the problem. And may I say, without fail, I guarantee you, they then complained that the problem caused them to not want to go to the temple anymore. So the tithe is now missing. They have forsaken what they committed to God. Verse number 11 said, "Then contended I." Nehemiah was not a sissy. The word contended is he went straight to them, looked them right in the eye, and here's what he said. "Then contended I with the rulers and said, why is the house of God forsaken? And I gathered them together and set them in their place. Such a sweet fellow. Then brought all Judah the tithe of the corn and the new wine and oil unto the treasuries. And I made treasuries over the treasuries. Treasurers over the treasuries. Okay, I'm reading words that aren't there. And then he gives several names, and I'm not going to even try to go through them because I'm already feeling it's not going to happen tonight, all right? So he labels the individuals that he made treasurers over the treasuries, people that could be trusted and that would accomplish the job of accountability. And it goes on and says at the very bottom of verse number 13, for they were counted faithful, and their office was to distribute unto their brethren. Remember me, O my God, concerning this, and wipe not out my good deeds that I have done for the house of my God and for the offices thereof. Nehemiah very clearly says and states through this that the mentality of the people of God towards the house of God and the servants of the Lord is quite vital. Not to mention, in this prayer that he gives, it gives the idea and the connotation that Nehemiah lays before us the fact that having this focus is something that is worth being able to say, Lord, remember what we are doing. Lord, take account of the faithfulness that we have to the house of God, the things of God, and the men of God. Nehemiah very clearly makes that request because he feels, I put it this way, he feels justified in saying, Lord, please take note of the focus that I have and that I'm trying to bring back with your people. So there is this violation of the tithe taking place. Now, the whole reason of this, because their heart had changed, their priorities had changed. And as soon as priorities change, pocketbooks, the giving of God's people. And understand, remember, Malachi is given the admonition only 2 years after Nehemiah returns and sets things straight once again. All right? So this is all happening in a very short period of time. But in Malachi chapter 3, verse number 6, down to verse 12, it says, for I am the Lord, I change not. Therefore, ye sons of Jacob are not consumed. Even from the days of your fathers, ye are gone away from mine ordinances, and have not kept them. Return unto me, and I will return unto you, saith the Lord of hosts. But ye said, wherein shall we return? Will a man rob God? Yet ye have robbed me. But ye say, wherein have we robbed thee? In tithes and offerings. Ye are accursed. Ye are cursed with a curse. For ye have robbed me, even this whole nation. Bring ye all the tithes into the storehouse, that there may be meat in mine house. And prove me now herewith, saith the Lord of hosts, if I will not open you the windows of heaven and pour you out a blessing, that there will not be room enough to receive it. Now, by the way, I believe fully that that promise still applies today. I have seen it time and time and time again. If you are willing to prove the Lord, test his faithfulness. Well, I'm just waiting for him to come through. No. Stick your faith out there where it can get chopped off and see if God doesn't actually support it and build it. He said, prove me. Don't think of whether or not I can do it. Prove me and see if I won't open the windows of heaven and pour out a blessing. I've never one time seen God's people give to the work of the Lord and the gospel around the world, whether it's in regular giving of tithes or whether giving of offerings or it is giving of faith promise missions. I've never one time seen anyone give out of the abundance of what God has blessed them with, given out of the first fruits of their blessings. I've never once seen someone do that and God fail to provide. Now, he doesn't, it's not always that you put $100 in and God gives you $1,000. That's not always the way it works. Sometimes it's not money for money exchange. Sometimes you give according to how God lays on your heart to give, whether it's to a missionary or it's to the work of the Lord right here at the local church, or in any way you give, let's say monetarily. Sometimes you give monetarily and God provides physically. For example, there was a time frame I was traveling back and forth to Tennessee. I had an individual that had a tire shop. And I had not the truck I have now, I had a different truck. And he looked and said, "You need tires." And I'm like, "Well, I was planning on getting some." It's like, "No, you're getting some now." So he put 4 brand new tires on my truck. I'm trying to remember how many years it was. Do you remember how many years? I don't remember how many years or how many tens of thousands of miles, if not 100,000 miles plus. I ran those on these tires, much less still have half the tread left. What happened? Those are good tires. No, I got a good God who knows how to make objects last when they shouldn't. There's never been, it might not be that God gives you monetarily back, but if you pay attention, you will find where God provides in ways that should not happen when we are just faithful to give and do of ourselves in obedience. And that, by the way, that is the promise happening here in Malachi. He said, "Prove me. Go ahead, put me to the test. See if I won't pour out the blessings." And there have been times where the blessings have been so obvious we couldn't even ignore it if we tried to. I mean, it's like, wow! And there have been times the blessings that have been less obvious, but in the end still is clear. Not as eye-opening to make your field flourish better than any field around, even though it's surrounded by everybody. I can make that one field flourish in a way no other field is flourishing. And nobody will be able to explain it except for, well, it must have been God's hand of work. Verse number 12, he said, "And all nations shall call you blessed, for ye shall be a delightsome land, saith the Lord of hosts." By the way, just a thought. Have you ever at any point looked at somebody in your time of life and said, "Man, I wish the Lord blessed me like He's blessing them"? You ever looked around and not being selfish, just looking and saying, you personally watching, just noticing, man, it just seems like every time they turn around, the Lord's just blessing and blessing and sometimes that I believe is another way of that promise coming out, that the nations around will look and call you blessed. Listen, I believe there are people that watch your life and at times will look and say, "Wow, nothing ever like that ever happens to people I know." How did that happen? Where'd you find that? My goodness, how did that come about? And they look and say, "What makes you so blessed?" Now listen, let's just be honest. Whatever you do, don't get all puffed up. But there are times when people take notice and say, "It's obvious that God is blessing you right now in some ways that only He can." And by the way, some people say, "I've been there before, I've experienced it." And some people say, "Boy, I'd love to have that experience one day." May I say, if you'll remain faithful to God, you will. Now, this is not a wealth and prosperity preaching. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is, try God. Test God like He told the children of Israel, and you'll find that even today, when God's people put God to the test, He will not fail in the promises of His blessings. It may be big, it may be small, it may be something nobody notices, or it might be something people notice all the time. Regardless, God can do beyond what we can if we'll just be obedient in the simple things, such as just our faithful giving. How you handle your money with God creates an opportunity for God to handle giving back to you in ways you could only dream up. Let me give you this last thing, we're done. There was the violation not only of separation, the violation of the temple, the violation of the tithe, but there was the violation of the Sabbath. Now, this is one that's a little different. The fact that we have to be sure to make known that we do not observe the Sabbath. Okay, and preachers that try to say the Sabbath is Sunday, well, they're wrong. Sorry, it's not. Okay, the Sabbath is Saturday. The Sabbath is the seventh day need, and they sold it to somebody else within Israel every 7 years. The land that you bought that was not naturally to your family, but it belonged as an inheritance to a different family. Every 7 years, you were to surrender over that which you purchased and give it back to that family because it doesn't belong to you. In other words, everything you bought in that way was merely borrowed, but you always returned it. Sevens are important to God, especially in the Old Testament. And they had a command from God to observe the Sabbath day. We do not observe any longer the Sabbath day because there is a new covenant that has now replaced the old covenant. The old covenant dealt with the Sabbath or seventh day of the week recognition to the Lord. But the new covenant was sealed with the first day of the week because of a risen Savior. It is the Lord's day. But may I say, though the actual day of recognition and operation, though the actual day may have shifted from the last day of the week to now the first day of the week, the principle has not. The principle is it's still the Lord's day. It's still a day that God's people give to the recognition of the house of God, to the time spent with God. By the way, it was the Sabbath day in which they weren't to do any work. The Sabbath day, they weren't to. They were supposed to not be laboring of any sort. As a matter of fact, that's why the priests and all and the Pharisees were so upset when Jesus healed on the Sabbath day. But by the way, I'll remind you, he wasn't breaking the law. He was fulfilling the law in his own life, but he was bringing the new covenant. So therefore, he could heal if he wanted to. He's God. He made the rule, and he was about to replace the old rule with a brand new one. But the principle remains. What is that principle? There is a day that belongs, when it comes to the people of God, there is a day that the people of God have been given that belongs to the God we serve. And for us today, in the New Testament time frame, it is the first day of the week. We call it the Lord's Day. It is Sunday. Now, Nehemiah 10, verse number 31, the people made an oath concerning the keeping of the Sabbath. In chapter 13, I'm not going to read it all, but in chapter 13, verse number 15 to verse number 22, we find that they were now back to selling in the marketplace on the Sabbath day. They were back to ignoring the no work rule on the Sabbath day. They were no longer going to the temple and no longer spending time with their families and no longer focusing on the time frame or getting closer to the Lord on the Sabbath day. They had forsaken a holy day that was set apart for them, and they had gone back to business as usual according to the heathen world. And may I say, is that not also reminiscent of where we find ourselves today? If we're not careful, if you look around, those who claim to be the people of God have very little regard on a general basis today, very little regard to what is called the Lord's Day. Fewer and fewer spend much time giving God the first day of the week. And even then, I can give it, but make sure it's no more than an hour of my day, because it's all I have time to give him. Make sure we come in, do our little thing, and we go. And I did my part. I tipped God with my little bit of time on the Lord's day. Now I can go out and fish and hunt and do whatever else I want to do. Golf. Might as well hit something I enjoy doing too. But here's the problem. People have lost the reverence of the day belonging to the Lord. God's people, in Nehemiah's time, they had grown cold and they violated every single promise they made. And the last promise they were holding to that they violated was the Sabbath day. And instead, when they emptied the marketplace in revival and said, no more of that, this day belongs to the Lord. We're going to abide by the guidelines God has given us for the Sabbath day. And within a year, they had now shoved all that aside. They brought the marketplace back in. Now they're buying and selling, and now they're making money. Now they're living it big, high on the hog again, and they've completely forsaken setting anything aside for the Lord. By the way, no wonder they lost sight of the things of God. They gave no time for the rehearsing any longer of Scripture. There was no gatherings in the marketplace. There was no gathering around and preach. Tell us what the Scriptures say. What is the law that was given? There's no more of that. We're too busy with our business. Don't tell me I can't sell this on this Sabbath day. Almost said on Sunday. That's where everybody is today too. Don't tell me we can't have alcohol sales in Hartselle on Sunday. That's not fair. I'm just saying that's where we're at today. We're in the same situation they were in. There's a violation of separation, which led to a violation of the house of God, the temple. No more caring for what it really stands for and what it's supposed to be for our families. A violation of the tithe. I ain't giving nothing there. I got to keep it for myself. And then a violation of a day that belongs to the Lord. Don't even have time for God anymore. We're too busy with our businesses. And when Nehemiah returns and sees all this that's happening, just about has a heart attack. 1 year! 1 year! What are y'all doing? This is what put us in bondage in the first place. Man, it didn't take you very long and you went right back to the mud, didn't you? Like a pig back to the swaller. Just right back on in, jump on in and muddy up again. We worked so hard to rebuild the walls, worked so hard to put the gates back up, worked so hard to cleanse and make things right with God. And then in a year, you throw it all away. You're mixed with the world again. You're using the house of God in ways it's not supposed to be used. You stopped even giving and caring to the work of the Lord. And now you don't even have time for God in your daily lives. And that's when Malachi came in and you see more of the warnings. There's going to be serious issues to pay because of this. Do right, I'll bless you, God says. Continue down this path and you'll be a cursed people. Well, I tell you what, I don't want to be a cursed people. I don't want to be someone that God has to remove his hand of blessing from. I don't want Bethel Baptist Church to ever be a church that just exists on the corner of Bethel Road. We show up, do our thing, go home. We're just there. People see a few cars in the parking lot every now and then. What use is it if the hand of God can't be upon his people and upon the work he has given us in the area of blessing? And what are we doing? Nehemiah said, we worked so hard to get right with God. Why would you throw it all away? We did some hard things to get back in line with what was true and right, and you just chunked it aside. May I say it's where we are in today's society again. See great moves of getting right and people cleaning up, just turn right around and jump back in the mud again because we get our eyes off of Him. Don't let the fire go out. Don't let the heart